Everybody knows Americans want big motorcycles. Loud, chrome, the kind of Harley-Davidson cruiser you can hear from 3 streets away. Small bikes are supposed to be for everybody else. For the crowded streets of Rome, the packed intersections of Bangkok, for people in cities who can't afford a car, America never loved the little bike. Except that's not true. And the proof is one of the strangest numbers in the entire history of the automobile. Because in 1959, the total number of motorcycles imported into the United States was about 6,300, barely a rounding error. 4 years later, that number had exploded to roughly 148,000, and almost all of it came from a single Japanese company selling a bike smaller than the electric scooter parked outside your local coffee shop. By 1964, that little step-through, the Honda 50, had taken more than half of the entire American motorcycle market. Housewives in the suburbs rode them. College students rode them across campus. There's even a story that a sitting American president told Japan's leaders that Honda had changed American life, so America didn't hate small motorcycles. For a few glorious years, America was obsessed with them. And then that love reversed. The exact same tiny bikes that swept across American driveways in the 1960s went on to conquer the entire planet, everywhere except the one country that fell for them first. Today, the best-selling vehicle in the history of the world is a small motorcycle, and for most of its life, you couldn't even buy it new in the United States. So how did the small motorcycle show up in America, win in a landslide, and then get quietly run out of town? Grab a coffee, because the real reason has almost nothing to do with taste. Rewind to that Los Angeles storefront in 1959. American Honda opened in a tiny shop on West Pico Boulevard, delivering little bikes out of the back of a truck to hobby shops and sporting goods stores. Back then, the American motorcycle in the public imagination was a leather jacket and an outlaw. Movies like The Wild One had welded the motorcycle to the biker gang, to the Hells Angels, to the guy your parents warned you about. If you rode a motorcycle in 1959, respectable America quietly assumed the worst about you. Then, in 1962, an advertising agency handed Honda one of the most famous slogans ever written. You meet the nicest people on a Honda. And instead of leather and danger, the magazine ads in Life showed housewives, college kids, a dad giving his kid a ride, clean-cut people in sweaters riding shiny little Honda 50s through sunny neighborhoods. It rebranded the entire idea of the motorcycle almost overnight. Now it looked like a cheerful little runabout that a normal person could park in the driveway. And it worked on a scale that still gets taught in marketing classes today. Honda's yearly American sales rocketed from around 40,000 to about 200,000, a jump of 500%. Total motorcycle sales across the country, which had barely moved for decades, shot straight up, and the industry credited almost all of it to Honda. Within a couple of years, this one company from a nation that had been in rubble 15 years earlier held more than half of the American market. The proud old British names, Triumph, Norton, and BSA, the marquees that had ruled American motorcycle imports for years, suddenly had a problem they never saw coming. And so did the American legend Harley-Davidson. In the space of a few short years, a company selling 50 cubic centimeter bikes had rewritten who owned the road, and almost nobody in the old guard believed it could happen until it already had. Here is the part that matters for our story. The bikes doing all of this damage were tiny, 50 cubic centimeters, 90 cubic centimeters, 100 and something cubic centimeters, step-through frames, a total beginner could ride to work. In the mid-1960s, the small, cheap, sensible motorcycle was not some niche in America. It was the mainstream. It was the whole boom. So if America loved these little bikes this much, why did almost every one of them vanish from American roads? The answer is that America is the single hardest place on earth for a small motorcycle to survive. And it has almost nothing to do with what Americans feel. It comes down to how the country is physically built. There are three forces grinding away at the little bike that hardly anyone ever thinks about. Start with the most basic one: gasoline. Everywhere else in the world, the number one reason a person buys a small motorcycle is money. A 110 cubic centimeter bike barely sips fuel. In a country where filling a car tank actually hurts, that tiny engine is not a toy, it is survival. And here is where America is genuinely strange. American gas is some of the cheapest in the entire developed world. Today, a gallon runs around $3.35. Drive through Germany, France, or the United Kingdom, and you are staring at the equivalent of $7, $8, sometimes over $9 a gallon at the pump. That gap is not an accident. European governments deliberately tax fuel through the roof, partly to push people off cars and onto trains and buses. America did the opposite and kept fuel cheap for a century. Think about what that does to the little bike. Its single biggest selling point, incredible fuel economy, barely matters when gas is already cheap. On the streets of Hanoi, sipping fuel is the difference between affording the ride and not affording it. In suburban Ohio, filling up the family SUV is annoying, but no one is choosing a 100 cubic centimeter step-through over a car just to survive the gas bill. Right there, the small bike quietly loses its greatest advantage. Now stack the second force on top: distance and the American car. Look at how the country is laid out. Endless suburbs, huge gaps between where people live and where they work, and the largest network of high-speed interstate highways on the planet. All of it poured in concrete across the same decades the Honda boom was happening. To function in most of America, you do not need a vehicle that is nimble in a medieval alley. You need something that can sit at 70 miles an hour on a wide-open interstate for an hour in the rain with your stuff strapped on. A little 90 cubic centimeter engine is white-knuckle terrifying and exhausting in that world. It does not want to be doing highway speed next to a semi-truck. And here comes the killer detail: what a used car costs in America. In a country absolutely flooded with cheap secondhand cars, a family that needs real transportation does not step down to a motorcycle. They buy a used car. It is dry, it is safe, it carries the kids and the groceries. So the small motorcycle in America never got to be what it is everywhere else, the cheapest way for a working family to get around. That job was already taken. Buy the car. Picture the very same family in two different countries. On the streets of Vietnam, a small Honda is the family car. Mom, dad, a kid, and a week of groceries, all balanced on one little step-through because the alternative is no vehicle at all. Now picture that family in suburban Dallas. They are not weighing a motorcycle against nothing. They are weighing it against a cheap used sedan sitting on a dealer's lot down the street. In that matchup, the little bike loses every single time, and it loses on purpose. So the little bike lost its money advantage to cheap gas, and it lost its actual job to cheap cars and long distances. And then comes the third force, and this one is pure regulation, and it is the one almost nobody knows about: licensing. In most of the world, you cannot just walk into a dealership and buy a big motorcycle. Europe runs a tiered license system. You start on the smallest category, restricted to a little 125 cubic centimeter machine making about 15 horsepower. After that, you move up to a middle tier capped near 47 horsepower. Only after years of that and more tests are you legally allowed onto an unrestricted full-size motorcycle. The whole system funnels every new rider onto small bikes and keeps them there. Across much of Asia, it is the same story. Small displacement is simply what a normal license and a normal budget put you on. Now look at the United States. There is one motorcycle endorsement. You pass a single test at the DMV, and legally you can ride anything. A 125 cubic centimeter commuter or a 1,800 cubic centimeter touring monster that weighs more than 800 pounds. There is no ladder. Nothing in the American system ever nudges a new rider toward a small bike. Not for a year, not for a month, not for a single day. Put yourself on that showroom floor. You are a young American, you just earned your motorcycle endorsement, and every size of bike in the building is legal for you to ride home today. The small one looks slow. The big one looks like the movies. Nothing in the law, nothing in the roads, nothing in your wallet is pushing you towards small. So which one do you buy? That one question is how America split off from the rest of the planet. Because once a country stops using the motorcycle as basic transport and starts using it as a weekend thrill, everything about the bikes changes. If the motorcycle is your car, you want it small, cheap, and efficient. If the motorcycle is your hobby, your escape, your Sunday morning on an open road, you want it big, fast, and loud. America walked straight down that second road. And American culture leaned all the way in. The motorcycle stopped being a cheap way to get to the factory and turned into a symbol of freedom and rebellion out on a wide-open highway. Think of the imagery burned into the American brain. Two riders on big machines rolling across the desert in easy rider, chrome and leather and endless horizon. That kind of machine is about the feeling and the image, the rumble at a stoplight, the open road on a Sunday. And nobody gets that feeling out of a 90cc step-through. If you're finding this as fascinating as I am, take 2 seconds and hit that subscribe button. I dig into stories like this every single week. Now back to the American showroom. You can actually see the split in the cold industry numbers. Line up the world's motorcycle business and it breaks cleanly into two different markets. One half builds cheap, small, entry-level bikes for transportation, and that is by far the bigger market worldwide, driven by the giant manufacturing nations of China, India, and Indonesia. The other half builds large, expensive machines for recreation, and American producers sit almost entirely on that second side, building big 601cc and up motorcycles for fun, not for commuting. The little transport bike that owns the roads across Asia, Africa, and Latin America is a rounding error in American production. Then, in the early 1980s, America drew that line in actual law. By then, the Japanese takeover was complete and brutal. When a recession slammed the American motorcycle market in the early 1980s, the Japanese factories kept shipping bikes anyway, and dealer lots filled up with a glut of unsold machines that dragged prices down. Harley-Davidson, the last American motorcycle company left standing, was suddenly on the edge of death. A decade earlier, Harley had basically owned the market for the biggest bikes, the 1000cc and up class. Now, its share of that class had collapsed below 15%. Its warehouses were stuffed with unsold bikes, and Japanese cruisers were undercutting it by thousands of dollars each. So Harley went to Washington and asked for protection. And in April 1983, President Ronald Reagan gave it to them. He put a tariff starting at around 45% on imported motorcycles, but only on the big ones, engines of 700 cubic centimeters and larger. Sit with that number for a second. The American government, trying to rescue its motorcycle industry, drew the protective line at 700 cubic centimeters. Big bikes were the industry worth saving. The line itself declared what an American motorcycle now was: something large. The Japanese response is almost funny. They simply built engines at 699 cubic centimeters to duck under the tariff and shifted more assembly to their US plants. Economists who studied it later mostly agreed the tariff barely mattered, and that what really saved Harley-Davidson was Harley-Davidson finally fixing its own bikes. The proof is almost poetic. Just 4 years after begging Washington for cover, Harley walked back in and asked the government to kill the tariff a year early because it was profitable again and no longer needed the protection. But the message was set in stone. In the United States, the motorcycle that counted, the one worth a trade war, was the heavyweight. From there, it became an arms race in one direction only. Yup, bigger engines, more chrome, more highway muscle, more presence in the parking lot. The endpoint of that race is a machine like the Honda Goldwing, a touring bike with a 1,833 cubic centimeter engine that can weigh more than 800 pounds fully loaded. A rolling leather sofa with a stereo and cruise control. And remember, thanks to that single license, a teenager who has never ridden anything can legally throw a leg over one and pull onto the interstate. That is the American motorcycle now. Enormous, expensive, and built for a weekend, not a Monday commute. The little Honda 50 that started the whole love affair could not be further away. Now look at what happened to the bike America walked away from. While the United States was busy turning the motorcycle into a giant recreational toy, the small bike it fell out of love with went out and won the entire rest of the world. That same basic Honda step-through, the Super Cub, just kept getting built year after year, decade after decade. By 2017, Honda had produced more than 100 million of them. It is, by a massive margin, the best-selling motor vehicle ever made, more than the Volkswagen Beetle, more than the Ford Model T. Walk through the streets of Ho Chi Minh City, Jakarta, or Delhi today, and you are looking at rivers of small motorcycles, thousands of them pouring through every intersection, carrying whole families, stacked with crates and boxes and livestock, doing the exact job the little Honda once did in American suburbs. For hundreds of millions of people, a small motorcycle is simply how you get to work, how you carry the kids, how you run a business. In a lot of these cities, it basically is the transport system. Commuters, delivery drivers, street vendors, entire supply chains all moving on two small wheels, most of them riding some descendant of the same humble design Honda first drew up back in the 1950s. And that is the quiet irony at the center of this whole story. America didn't reject the small motorcycle because Americans have bad taste, or because they're hopelessly addicted to noise and chrome. America let it go because it's the one place on Earth where the little bike never got to keep a job. Cheap gas erased its savings. Cheap cars and enormous distances erased its purpose. And a wide-open license plus a market and even a tariff that all pointed straight at big made sure that if an American was going to ride at all, they might as well ride large. Everywhere else, the motorcycle stayed a tool. In America, it became a trophy. And look at how narrow that trophy market really is now. For years, the core American motorcycle buyer was the aging baby boomer chasing the open road on a big cruiser. And as that generation gets older, the whole industry keeps quietly panicking about who is going to replace them. There are early signs that younger American riders, priced out of giant cruisers and a lot less attached to the open road fantasy, are drifting back towards smaller, cheaper, lighter bikes, the exact kind of cheap, sensible machine most other countries never gave up. Small, beginner-friendly motorcycles, the spiritual grandkids of that original Honda 50, are quietly showing up on American showroom floors again. But whether that turns into a real second love affair is a story still being written right now. So the next time somebody tells you Americans just never wanted small motorcycles, you can tell them they have it completely backwards. America wanted them so badly that a nearly bankrupt company from a bombed-out country took half the market in about 5 years. The love was real, and it was enormous. It just didn't survive contact with cheap gasoline, wide-open highways, secondhand cars, and a country that lets anyone ride anything. The small motorcycle didn't fail in America because it was a bad machine. It failed because America is the one country on Earth where it never had a reason to exist. But that little bike America let slip away, the tiny Honda that kicked off this entire story, went on to become the most successful vehicle humanity has ever built. And the story of how a company that used to make engines for war pulled that off is somehow even crazier than the one you just heard.